Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining us for this edition of the GMF webinar series. We host this series where every month we feature a different topic connected to our GMF programs. And this month, we are doing something special and bringing you an opportunity to listen to one of our most popular workshops during our Sustainable Communities Conference, which was held in Ottawa in February 2023 on becoming a climate champion for your community. My name is Sharon Levitsky, project coordinator with the Green Municipal Fund, and I'm here with my colleague, Jesse Granger, project officer, and we are both with the Green Municipal Fund's capacity development team. Before we go any further, I'd like to take a moment to acknowledge the land that we are on today. So, on behalf of FCM, I'd like to begin this session by acknowledging that I am joining you from lands that have been inhabited by Indigenous peoples for thousands of years. We at FCM recognize the Algonquin Anishinaabe people as the traditional custodians of the land upon which FCM's offices are located. I personally am located in Montreal, recognizing it as the traditional territory of the Kanien'kehá:ka peoples and Haudenosaunee Confederacy. We also recognize the contributions of Métis, Inuit, and all First Nations, both in shaping and strengthening this community and country as a whole. So wherever you are, please join me in paying our respects to the original stewards of this land and committing ourselves to thoughts and actions that will lead to meaningful reconciliation wherever we live now. And with that, let's move on to housekeeping for today. So before we dive in, a few housekeeping items to get through. So today's event will be taking place in English with French interpretation available. To join the French interpretation, you can click the interpretation button in the lower right of your screen. It's a little globe. Aujourd'hui, nous avons des présentations en français et en anglais. Si vous souhaitez écouter en français, veuillez cliquer sur le bouton d'interprétation en bas à droite de votre écran. C'est un petit globe et sélectionnez l'option française. As we move through our presentation today, I ask that you submit your questions to the Q&A box as they come up, and we'll address them during the overall Q&A at the end. And you're also welcome to make comments and ask other questions through the chat box during the presentations in the language of your choice. We will keep an eye out for any clarification questions or anything that can be addressed during the presentations, and we'll strive to do so when appropriate. And so for today's agenda, next slide, please. So our agenda today, we will be featuring two presentations from amazing speakers who spoke during one of our workshops at the Sustainable Communities Conference, Rachel Swenseed and Shannon Zakidniak. And following their presentations, we'll have a question and answer period. And so with that, just a couple of points before we begin their presentations. So something about FCM's Green Municipal Fund. We represent 2,000 member municipalities in every part of Canada's 10 provinces and 3 territories. FCM's Green Municipal Fund, or GMF, exists to develop and execute sustainability projects, establish and share best practices and lessons learned, and improve the environmental performance of municipal installations. GMF supports innovative projects that tackle environmental challenges and have significant social benefits, as well as strong business cases. It shares lessons learned from these projects with Canadian cities and communities of all sizes. Next slide, please. So today, real question is, why exactly would we be interested in a subject such as becoming a climate champion for your community? And what we know is that climate champions can be leaders in their communities. Their voices and their actions can drive meaningful change. And so the question is, and what we want to address today, how do we use those leadership skills to cultivate transformative climate action? Next slide, please. And there are a few questions you would want to keep in mind as you're, one, listening to today's presentation, and two, continuing on in your work as an existing or new climate champion in your community. So what does it mean to be a climate leader? How can I empower staff to lead bold initiatives and find ways to connect with other staff who I work with? How can I use my platform to champion climate action? Where does your position in your community fall into this? And how can I embed climate action in the work our municipality does? Slide, please. Okay, so now we're going to begin with our presentations. And so our first presenter today is Rachel Swenseed, who is a first-time counselor from the town of Okotoks, Alberta. And Rachel was born and raised in Okotoks and has called Okotoks her home for over 30 years. She holds a Bachelor of Science in Environmental Conservation with a major in land reclamation. Rachel has worked extensively across the province in oil sands, forestry, and conventional oil and gas reclamation. For the past 10 years, Rachel has worked as a natural resources educator in schools across Western Canada, helping students and teachers understand the science and multiple perspectives associated with natural resources development. Rachel is a committed community member and co-founded an Okotoks non-for-profit organization dedicated to providing free essential baby items to Foothills families facing hardships. She's also a volunteer with Foothills Community Immigrant Services. Through these experiences, Rachel has worked with hundreds of Foothills families with young children and has a strong understanding of the role that municipal government plays in people's lives. Her passion for the environment led her to becoming a member of the Okotoks Sheep River Valley Committee. Rachel and her husband have 2 young children, 2 dogs, and for the past several years had 4 backyard chickens as part of the town's Urban Hen Project. And with that, Rachel, take it away.
Thank you so much for that introduction, Sharon. I am very excited to be here, everybody. I'm just going to start my timer here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to introduce a little bit about myself, the town that I'm from, and then how kind of climate action has been a part of my term so far. And again, what we're talking about today, climate leadership and how to move that forward. So next slide, please. So Okotoks is in Alberta. We have, the Okotoks is actually a Blackfoot word meaning big rock, and this is a big rock just outside of our community. Next slide. We have a population of about 30,000 people. We're located 30 minutes from the city of Calgary, and we are located in a semi-arid region. Next slide, please. We have a wonderful historic downtown. And on the right there, you'll see that we have the Sheep River at the top, and at the bottom, you'll see that we have experienced flooding in our community. So the community that I live in, we have a lot of variability in our river, and we are also facing some challenges with our water supply, not water supply, but we are kind of water scarcity challenges. And our big claim to fame currently is that here in Okotoks, we have a lot of urban deer, and our deer actually made it onto the Stephen Colbert Show. So I always like to say that as well. So hopefully that gives you an idea, kind of the community that I'm coming from. Yeah, you can go to the next slide, please. So as Sharon said in her presentation there, my background is actually in conventional oil and gas reclamation. And then I moved into education, working in schools, talking about natural resource development and multiple perspectives around it. And then through the love that I have of my community and really seeing how policy changes people's lives, I decided to run in the Alberta election in 2021. And I was elected, which has been wonderful. And I have 2 young kids, family, and have been really enjoying this so far. Next one, please. So brief overview about kind of climate action in my election campaign, and then where I'm going to go to next. So before I was elected, the town of Okotoks already had a climate action plan that the previous council put in, and it's phenomenal. So basically, that was really important to me, and I took that and I put it into my campaign, and I said that there are some points of this climate action plan that are really important, and I want to bring those forward if elected. So next slide, please. So here we have, I was elected, which was fantastic. This is our town of Okotoks strategic plan. And in that strategic plan, you can see in the green there that it says under demonstrate environmental leadership that we are going to be working towards the climate action plan targets. Especially around climate change resilience, greenhouse gas emissions, water conservation, et cetera, et cetera. So the first kind of tip that I would give climate champions in your community is that I see that lots of folks joining the call today are in the East, and I'm not too sure about your your municipal election schedule, but when those municipal elections come up, let the candidates know why climate action is important to you, and make it personal. Like why do you want to see that move forward in your municipality? How is it important to you? Because it was in my campaign and just through my conversations in community that I heard this was really important to people. And when you let those candidates know that it's important to you, and then they get elected, it hopefully becomes policy, right? And so it did make it into our strategic plan. Super happy about that. Next slide, please. So it's so climate action made it into our strategic plan in the town of Okotoks, and then I kind of took that kind of one step further. As I mentioned, in Okotoks, we have a beautiful Sheep River running through it. It's a very variable river, so it has really, really high river flows around kind of the June flood season, and then it can get really, really low. And so we have really focused on water conservation in the community. But with climate change impacts to water supplies, it can exacerbate that. And so I really wanted to kind of move policy forward, saying that because of climate change impacts, we really need to even focus more on water conservation. So I put a motion in talking about going forward, any new developments we have in the community. I really wanted to see that lawns be drought tolerant grass species. I really wanted to see that there would be a minimum percentage xeriscaping requirements. And then there's a couple more points of that motion. But again, I knew this was important for people in Okotoks, and we're growing so fast here in this area of Alberta that all those new developments, I really wanted to see stronger water conservation measures. And so on this point here too, I'll say, as climate champions in your community, so we put this motion forward. I was very scared. It was my first motion. And now administration is working on the actual policy, and it's going to come back to council. Now through this, the media picked it up. I obviously posted it on my social media and things like that. And there's pushback, obviously, like that's just what happens in policy creation. But then folks have told me, yes, it's like, this is what we want to see. Yes, I'm really happy you're doing this. So if you are someone in your community and you see an elected official doing something that you think will be moving climate action forward, let them know about it, because sometimes the pushback can be quite sometimes it can be strong. And so it's really good to hear from folks saying, no, you're making the change that I want to see. And so on this one specifically too, I've heard from folks saying that they are happy that this is being developed, and it kind of gives me the motivation as an elected to be like, yes, we're going to keep pushing on this. So next slide, please. Excellent. So here are challenges and opportunities of climate action at a municipal level. So I'm not going to go through all of these, but I'm going to touch on one, the climate change communication. So climate leadership, being a climate leader, obviously we want to move climate action forward. We want to be innovative. We want to be bold. We want to make our communities better. But I do believe from my experience so far, and I've only been in here, it's going to be 2 years in October, that climate change communication about how we communicate what we want to do, what we want to see, how we want to see our communities transformed is so important. And I believe up until this point, I don't think there's been a failure of that communication, but I think it has done a disservice to how we talk about the benefits of climate action. And I will give you some examples to let you know what I mean. I'm going to focus on this point because it's very real in our community. It's very real in the province that we live in. And I think hopefully it can help you wherever you live as well. So when I talk about climate change communication, obviously here as folks on this webinar, we understand that taking climate action is important, both in resilience and in adaptation. But when we talk about climate change, the impacts or the action that we're taking, the benefits that come from it, sometimes we get lost or we don't really focus on those co-benefits. So if we're going to be investing in public transit, reduction in greenhouse gas emissions, that co-benefit really needs to be front and center. And it's something that I think that I have done. I'm going to be working on more. So climate action is important, but for those folks in our communities that do not want to see any funds invested in climate action, that do not agree that climate action is happening, that's when those co-benefits need to be brought front and center. So, and then as climate leaders, we can have those conversations in our communities with folks that may not be on the same page as us, but we can find commonalities with people in our community. So I'll give you an example of this. So I presented this presentation in Ottawa at the Sustainable Communities Conference. It was a wonderful opportunity to go there. And I came back to my community and there were folks in the community that were really not happy about me presenting on this topic, or that even our community should be moving forward on climate action. Now, it kind of got wrapped up in some of the conversations that have been happening kind of across Canada around 15-minute communities. It just kind of exploded. Now, on my Facebook page, the post saying that I'm really excited to be here presenting on moving climate action forward, it blew up and it got messy. But in those comments there was someone, a climate champion, that went into there, and instead of talking about why we need to take climate action, this person started talking about the co-benefits of climate action. And so they really highlighted looking at how investment in infrastructure in climate action helps save the city and citizens money. They looked at how building efficient houses really helps the people who live in them enjoying comfort, low utility bills, etc. So again, they really focus on the co-benefits and help to steer the conversation, saying you might not agree with climate action, but you can agree, or we can agree with the co-benefits that climate action provides. So that's another way when we talk about climate change communication, really trying to highlight those. Next slide, please. So what I know so far in this role, so when, again, moving climate action forward, sometimes depending on the community that you're from, you're going to have to take risks and you have to trust the process. So me as an elected, it's definitely risk. Sometimes like I said, it's really scary to make motions. Sometimes I get nervous doing these things for sure, but I need to trust the process and democracy and our staff that everything will happen the way it should go. So with that xeriscaping policy or that water conservation policy, I'm going to trust the process. Administration is going to make that policy, and then it'll be up to council to decide whether, based on public feedback, to move it forward. The next thing is be kind first and be right later. And so this is, again, in that climate change communication, when we are talking about why climate change action is so important, really not right away being like, it has to happen because X, Y, and Z, but really trying to understand where folks are coming from so we can have those conversations. And on that, I will note another one that I really like to say in my head too is be a scout, not a warrior. So after my experience of presenting at the conference and coming back and talking to the folks that were really upset about, you know, climate action, I turned into a scout, and I really wanted to understand what was the concern. And it really, climate action was for sure concern, but there was an overarching concern about government overreach. And so they thought that, I'm not going to go into the details, it doesn't really matter. But in response to that, I made it as transparent as possible on why these policies are coming forward for folks to understand that it is the residents of my community that want to see this. And the last point here is connect with elected officials and other climate champions. So in your community, as you are advancing climate action, sometimes it can be lonely, sometimes it can be discouraging. So find other champions in your community that are also doing the same work that you are doing or that are passionate about it there. And together, as you move through this journey, you are able to kind of deal with the highs and the lows. For me as an elected, it has saved me in these past 2 years to connect with other electeds that are also doing things in their community around climate action. So I know that I'm not alone on this, and that that there's a community behind me to support me as I try to move climate action forward in my community. So I think I'm at the 15 minutes. So I will leave it there, and then we will have time for questions after. Thank you so much, everyone, for listening. I really appreciate it. Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much, Rachel, for your really insightful presentation and all of that great advice for people who are looking to be climate action champions in their communities. I think there's going to be so much they will be able to take from you. And with that, we're going to move on to our next presentation and final presentation of the day. So our next presenter is Shannon Zakidniak, a first-term counselor from the city of Regina, Saskatchewan. Shannon is a passionate community builder who has spent the past decade focused on improving the lives of Regina residents. Her work has included management roles with several community organizations, including Wascana Solar Cooperative, REACH, and the Regina Farmers Market. She has a master's degree in environmental studies and a bachelor's in journalism. Shannon is also a published writer and former ESL teacher. She is the founder of Regina's award-winning Enviro Collective and co-founder of Food Regina. As a dedicated volunteer, she has served on the board of many community organizations. Shannon and her husband, John, have 2 sons, Wiley 6 and Ivan 4, and a dog named Penny. And with that, Shannon, it is now your turn.
Thank you. Can you hear me okay? If I can get thumbs up. Okay, great. Yeah, if we can advance to the next slide, please. And maybe the next one as well. Okay, so all of the things on this slide or most of them were already covered by Sharon. So, and thank you for that introduction. So I won't go over all of it again. What I will say is some of the things that weren't mentioned in that bio is maybe before I get to that, I do want to say, so, you know, as mentioned, I've been a city councilor since 2020, November 2020. And I ran for council to advance local action on climate and environment because, and hopefully this is your experience as well, in Canada and many places in the world, the most inspiring environmental action is happening at the municipal level. And so I wanted to be part of advancing environmental policy municipally. And that's certainly the case for us here in Saskatchewan. And so when I I started Enviro Collective. This is an organization that still exists. And what we were doing with Enviro Collective is advocacy. One of the things we were doing is advocating to council for changes that we would like to see municipally. And so I already had experience interacting with council, and we had an energy and sustainability framework that was passed to create this framework to lead us to net zero emissions by 2050. This work had not begun yet. And so I wanted to be a part of the council that would be advancing this work. And so that's why I decided to run for council. And I also wanted to demonstrate that politicians could talk about climate in Regina, in Saskatchewan. At the time of the election, so November 2020, it was still fairly uncommon for politicians here to feel comfortable talking about climate. So obviously we need to be able to talk about issues in order to address them and to demonstrate that we don't need to be scared to talk about difficult issues. And so that was another reason that I decided to run. And I was successful. Like, it was not, I easily won my seat. And so I do want to say that it was in my campaign materials. My environmental background was featured prominently. And although at the doorsteps, I certainly didn't lead with, I'm here, I want to focus on climate. I led with, although that's true, people want to know about what I'm going to do about the issues that matter most to them. And so that's what people want to talk about on the doorstep, whatever it is that they're most concerned about, and how am I going to help that? And if they want to ask me about my environmental background or what I want to do for climate, of course, I'm happy to talk about that. So, so yeah, I already had experience advocating to council, decided to run municipally, and since getting elected, I've joined, I became the co-chair of Regina's Community Advisory Group, advancing our framework. So I was part of the creation of the framework, part of the community engagement that happened. I became a member of the Green Municipal Fund Council. So this is the group across the country that helps make some of the governance or policy decisions in relation to the Green Municipal Fund. And then I've joined the Canadian Urban Transit Association Transit Board Committee. I'm going to be elected. There's an upcoming, I've been acclaimed in the election to be upcoming election to be chair of that group. So that's exciting for me, and also ways that I can continue to work toward climate policy, environmental policies, not just in Regina, but to try and also have an impact on the work that's being done across the country. I think we could advance to the next slide now. Okay, so this was talking about a success that we've had since the election. And so this community advisory group that I was co-chair of, the purpose of it was to lead the engagement to develop the framework. And we worked with Sustainable Solutions SSG group, and they've done this type of work helping municipalities come up with their frameworks across North America. And they told us that our community engagement was among the most robust that they have ever seen. And due to my experience in advocating for environment and climate policies prior to the election, I was connected with a lot of grassroots community members who had concerns and were wanting strong environmental policy. So I was able to make sure that those voices were heard, and that their concerns, not that we were able to address them all, but that they felt that their voices were heard in the creation of the framework. The other co-chair of that group is someone who works for the city staff in Regina. And they were able to focus on bringing industry to the table, because Regina is a city whose economy is still heavily reliant on fossil fuels and the fossil fuel industry. So for folks who have strong ties to those industry, it was important for their voices to be heard as well, and for their concerns to be addressed in the creation of the framework. So as noted here, we hosted multiple engagement opportunities over the year where we were developing this framework, and our focus was also on implementing equity in the framework, and so that we're not leaving folks behind as we're developing, as we're working toward net zero in 2050. So what was surprising to me is when our council unanimously approved our framework in March of 2022. I would not have imagined that was possible. And I think that's because of all the work that we did to make sure that there was engagement, and then we had a focus on equity as we're developing the framework. And we also received a lot of accolades in how we were going to ensure that we were not leaving folks behind in implementing the framework, not creating larger gaps. And of course, when that work will be most important is in the implementation of the framework, but we took that very seriously in the creation of the framework and what policies we would prioritize. And I think I just also want to say another success in that regard is that we also were able to, since the framework passed, Regina has also, we now have fare free transit for ages 13 and under, and we used to have 5 and under. And this is also a result of engagement specifically by the youth of Regina. And I had these relationships with youth who were concerned about environment, and I continued speaking to these people and helping them to sort of like give them advice about what are the ways to engage with council to make their voices heard. And they continue to, this was their initiative, strongly give this message in the creation of the framework and the creation of a transit master plan that we were also working on at the same time, to continue to say, we want fare free transit for, they were asking for 18 and under, and they consistently brought that message. And so to me, this is also an example of equity. We will reduce so now we have fare free transit 13 and under. That actually puts us at the forefront, not of municipalities offering fare free transit in the country. So it's a major victory, and it's due to the leadership that the youth took to advocate for that. And so this is an example of equity. We want to reduce emissions, but we also want to make sure that the youth in our city, all youth, are able to get around the city in a barrier-free, without in an affordable way. We are offering fare-free transit. We're making it equitable for everybody to be able to reduce their emissions. I think we can go to the next slide. In terms of challenges that I've personally come across in this process, there's many successes and there's many challenges too. So misinformation, and I think Rachel touched on this in her presentation. There's so much misinformation out there about climate, addressing like climate change, climate policy, environmental policies, and just in general. And so I think I could spend all of my time addressing misinformation. So I have to choose how and when to engage. And generally, I find that I'm able to have the best conversations with people in person or over the phone, not on social media. And so it doesn't mean that I would ignore messages on social media, but that I would redirect folks to have a conversation with me in a live conversation over the phone or in person. And I've had a lot of success in having difficult conversations in that manner. And then another challenge would be attacks. And I think Rachel also touched on that too. And sometimes when you put yourself out there in a prominent position as a public figure of some sort, you are going to get attacked. And this is something I continually have to do, is commit to letting go of people pleasing. I'm not going to make everyone happy. That's not possible. And it's not actually personal. Like, these attacks that can happen online really are not directed at me. So when Rachel was giving her example of attacks about going to Ottawa, that wasn't about Rachel. That was about this concern that people have, as she mentioned, about people are worried that there's too much government regulation. They're concerned about losing their freedom, but it didn't have to do with Rachel. When people attack our climate policies online, that's not actually about me. And so it's a really important thing that I continually have to remind myself. And then as I've put myself out there, I've been clear that I'm here to advocate for a focus on climate policy. It's some folks might think or tend to think that I have an expertise in all areas in relation to climate and environment. And of course I don't. That's such a huge, broad category that there's no way that I have expertise in all those topics. And I know that, but it's helpful to remind myself that it's okay if I don't have, like, if somebody wants to ask me about, like, okay, tell me about like heat pumps in Saskatchewan and when are they going to lose their efficiency? And if I don't have the statistic at the top of my head, that is okay. And so I need to remind people and myself that I'm not, and I can't be an expert on every sustainability topic. And I try my best to have a good understanding. And it's okay to tell people I don't know, but here's a place for you to get more information, or I'll get back to you. Okay, we can advance to the next slide, please. Okay, so some of the takeaways for me is normalize talking about environmental and climate issues. Honestly, it's as easy, that one, as talking about it, just making it, we have to normalize these conversations. We can't address climate in a meaningful way if we are scared to even talk about it. And then this sort of relates to one of the challenges I was saying. Choose a focus. So if I'm not going to be an expert on every sustainability topic, that's fine. I can't be. What is my focus? And yes, my focus is advancing climate policy on council. Even more specifically, what is my focus? What are my goals? And what do I want to commit to continuous learning about? Staying focused is something that I think is really important in this work. It's easy to get sidetracked. It's easy for something new to come up and distract you. But if you stay focused, I think you have better results. Relationship building is so key. For me personally, I've had some things come up in my family life in the past couple of months that have meant that I haven't been able to be as give as much time and energy to this work as I would have before. If you have a community, if you know that there's other people who are doing this work, then it makes it okay for you to take a step back when you need to take a step back. And so I think whether you're an elected official, whether you're on staff, whether you're an active community member, knowing that you have a group of people who are doing this work makes it easier for you to take time when you need it, to take a step back, but also makes you feel supported. And if you're working together, you're going to be able to accomplish much more than if you're on your own. And it's also a way to avoid burnout. And number 4 talks about the for the success of our framework getting unanimous approval. Another thing that we noticed as our consultant was working on our framework is that the economic benefits that we have in Regina to moving towards a green economy were we have a lot of work to do, which also means that the economic benefits of doing this work means that this is not just an environmental plan, this is what I like to say, but an economic plan. Regina has a strong resource economy. If we want to continue to have a strong resource economy, then we need to change the way that we need to transition to have a strong green economy, a strong sustainable economy, or we will be left behind. And if we do that work now and we do it and we put the resources in, it'll be less expensive now, and the economic benefits for our community will be huge. And so this is, Rachel mentioned talking about the co-benefits. Another term you may have heard is multi-solving. And as we have we have major crises in our world that are converging at the same time, right? We don't have just a climate crisis. We have an addictions crisis. We have a crisis of houselessness. And so we need solutions that are going to touch on multiple problems. If we're housing people, we need to be housing people with make those developments as green as possible. We need to be multi-solving. We need to demonstrate co-benefits. We need to find solutions that are going to work to address multiple crises. And I think that's very important to bring us all together and address the many pressing issues that we have going on at the same time, so that we don't have to pick a favorite. We need to address all of these crises, and we need solutions that are going to touch on multiple problems. So I think I'm over my time, and maybe that's all I have for now, but those are some of the key takeaways for me.
Great. Thank you so much, Shannon, for your excellent presentation and great connections with embedding equity and just the idea of simply taking a break once you've reached your limit and need somebody else to step in. So I hope everybody here was able to take something away from that. And we will now move into our question and answer period. So Rachel, if you don't mind coming back. So we'll be doing some questions and answers. We have already gotten a couple of questions in the Q&A, and we'll see if there are answers to those. And otherwise, this is your opportunity to post whatever other questions you might have about being a climate champion, becoming a climate champion, anything about Shannon's or Rachel's journeys to get to where they are today. And yeah, so we look forward to any other questions you might have. So with that, one question we got for Rachel: have you implemented a xeriscape landscaping initiative for residents of Okotoks? Not Xeriscape, but xeriscape.
Great, thank you for the question. So currently right now, what happens is that we offer rebates to folks that want to xeriscape their yard. So if they have traditional turf or lawn on their property, we offer a rebate for them to xeriscape it, so the mulch and the plants that go into it. And I think that the town has done a really creative way of funding that rebate, and that actually comes through. We have, because of the water challenges we have in our area, we have tiered water utility pricing, and so the highest tier of water users, the revenue from there is what funds those xeriscape projects. So we don't have a policy around that it has to be xeriscape when a new home is built, but we do allow homeowners the option to xeriscape their yards on their property. Thank you.
Great, thank you. And then there was another question, which may require getting back, but when a county council sets emission targets far below the FCM target of a 45% emission reduction by 2030, what impact does this have on the relationship between FCM and that county? So I don't know if Shannon or Rachel, either of you have experience with that at all?
I might be able to touch on that due to my role in the Green Municipal Fund Council. I would say, and please correct me if I'm wrong, any FCM staff, but I mean, there's many places that don't have any emissions targets, period. And so FCM's mandate is to represent all communities, all municipalities, in our country, not just those that have emissions targets. So I don't think it has a negative impact, but I think FCM is certainly there and the Green Municipal Fund to help you do more, and do it more quickly, and to help support you to make that happen. So I would suggest that, I think it was Scott who asked this question, that Scott, if you would like to reach out to the FCM or the Green Municipal Fund, I think that they would be happy to reach out to your municipality to see if they could help you do even more. But that would be the impact, just the desire to help.
Okay, thank you. And so next question, are there suggestions for a community member to become a climate champion for someone who does not have a professional platform or established role to work from?
Sure, I think both Jen and I could probably answer that one. Also, I'll be really, really quick. Thank you for the question, Sarah. I think that for me, what I have seen so far in my community, even if you don't have a background in environmental sciences or climate change or anything like that, but you want to see climate action in your community, what I would recommend, and this is what I tell folks for sure, is get involved as much as you can in your local municipality and see what is on the agenda, what is being proposed, and if there are gaps in your policy. So get familiar with your municipality's policies around the environment or around climate change. And if there's a gap that you see, contact your council and say, like, why isn't this happening? Or have you thought about this? Then it kind of gets it on the agenda and it gets there as well. And as I mentioned as well, if you see something that your municipality is doing that you support and you feel that it's moving things forward, let those folks know that this is the direction that you are happy to see. So even if you don't have a background in it, but it's important to you, again, making that meaningful connection, being like, this is, I like this, what you're doing is important to me because it impacts me this way. And then we have tangible things to hold when we move these policies forward or keep those policies. So good question.
Yeah, and I agree with Rachel. You can absolutely, anyone can engage, certainly with my council, and I think this is the case with most councils. Like, you can come speak to council about anything, as long as it's related to what's on the agenda, but anyone can sign up. And that's one of the great things about municipal government, is how accessible it is. So first of all, you can do that. Any individual can take that action. But another thing I could suggest too is that you could join a environmental organization in your community, to get involved with a group of people who are doing similar work. And what I ended up doing in Regina, and I didn't actually set out to do this, was creating a new environmental or advocacy organization, because at that time, like, they kind of come and go here, but we didn't have one focused municipally at that time. There are others now. And so I actually had just put something on Facebook, asking, I was feeling despair in relation to the latest IPCC report at that time, and I wanted to do more. So I just put a Facebook post saying, do any of my friends want to get together to talk about how we can collectively work together for environmental and climate action? And then so many people did that we had this new group that started. And so it was as simple for me as putting something out there on Facebook. And absolutely, you can join already existing organizations or do that work individually if you'd like as well.
Okay, thank you so much for those answers. We have 2 more questions, and we will leave it at the 2 questions, and then we will move forward. So one question is more specifically about FCM. I'm beginning to deliver climate adaptation capacity building workshops in high schools in and around Ottawa. Does FCM have a youth capacity building initiative, or will it? With regards to any youth capacity building initiatives, unless there's any other FCM staff who wants to comment on this in the chat, I'm not aware of any initiative like that or any plans to have an initiative like that, just because there are so many other initiatives going on. So I guess kind of, pay attention to the FCM and Green Municipal Fund website for new developments and also our newsletters. And last question for Rachel and Shannon. While it is generally easy to convey the idea that waste reduction, diversion, energy conservation, water conservation, and circular economy initiatives have economic benefits, how do your municipalities make decisions on implementing or not a given project? I.e., how are environmental local economy benefits translated into funds to rank and prioritize projects and support implementation decisions?
That is a really good detailed question. Again, I'll be pretty brief on this. So from my experience so far, again, a year and a half into this, we have our climate action plan. There is a ton of different priorities on there. It really, a lot of what we want to prioritize and move forward. So before I got into this role, all the kind of the low hanging fruit was kind of finished, I guess I could say that. So things that in terms of budgets and staff time were completed. So that's kind of what I've seen so far. And now it's kind of moving on to the bigger, like chunkier pieces. And I guess for our community, what I'm seeing so far is what gets prioritized in terms of all those different things that you mentioned are those things that are really relevant and focused or important to the community. So again, in terms of water conservation, adaptation, that has kind of like risen to the top. In terms of like greenhouse gas emissions, we are on track to have all of our municipal buildings have renewable energy, like solar powers on them. And then after that, then we move on to the next level. So looking at the community. And so I also think the community also helps prioritize those what parts of the plan we devote the budget for. Because I do believe different communities have different buy-in in terms of what their priorities are, if that makes sense. So again, right now we're really focusing on water conservation, adaptation, and I'll leave it at that for now. Thank you.
Sorry, I just noticed the TV just went on in my house in the background, and I can't easily address that. When I was talking about personal things going on in my life, the latest is that my youngest got his tonsils removed, and so he's home right now and recovering from that. So please bear with me while he watches whatever he's watching in the background. So I'm looking at this question, which is it is a great question. So in terms of implementing whether a particular project gets implemented, part of that ultimately in my municipality gets decided by council. And one thing that has been really helpful is having an environmental impact section on all of our reports. And so that was something that council had to say that they wanted consistently. And it's something that we need to work on and continue to improve. But considering that with every project has been important. And I think this is where the multi-solving lens is crucial, because the better that we can tie in priorities of council in multiple ways, like this isn't just good for the environment, this is good for community safety and well-being, this is good for our economy, then we don't have to pick winners and losers. On our council, we also have we established priorities that as a council, and environment was one of those. And so that's also been helpful in making the case that like this is something that we all agreed is a priority. So we need to continue to work to make investments. And I guess I'll also say this is also where the community comes in. If the community the community is demanding strong action on climate and environment, then even if it's not a strong priority for a particular counselor, we're elected to listen to the community. So that's why it's really important to consistently hear that message as well from the community.
Great. Thank you so much, both of you, for your answers. So once again, I'd like to thank Rachel and Shannon for taking the time to speak so thoughtfully at today's webinar. And with that, thank you all for coming.